Imagine this. You come home one night expecting nothing more than the usual evening routine. But what greets you at the door is far from ordinary. In Houston, Texas, a seemingly peaceful neighborhood was thrown into chaos in an instant. A woman enters her home, unaware that everything she thought she knew about her life would soon crumble. As she walks through the door, she is faced with a reality so impossible to comprehend that it drives her to an unimaginable act. What she finds behind that door isn't just a betrayal, it's a moment that would alter her life forever. A moment that, in the blink of an eye, turned her world upside down and shocked an entire city. In this quiet corner of Houston, everything appeared to be in perfect order. A family seemingly untouched by the chaos of the outside world was living what many would call the American dream. A woman in her late 30s, married for over a decade, and raising a child of her own, lived in a home that could have come straight out of a magazine. Her name was Emily. She was the kind of person who took pride in the little things, the carefully planned family dinners, the weekend outings, the soft laughter echoing through the house. To anyone who looked at them, Emily and her husband, Mark, were the epitome of success. Mark was a well-regarded businessman, someone who had earned the respect of his peers and had built a career from the ground up. He was the kind of man who always seemed to have it together. A picture of confidence, a man who appeared to be as steady as the home he had built for his family. He was successful, charming, and by all accounts, a devoted husband. Together they lived in a luxurious home just outside the prestigious Houston Heights district, a place where the lawns were perfectly manicured and the streets were lined with tall old trees that whispered secrets of years gone by. It was the kind of place people wanted to live, where everything was pristine, carefully curated to show the world just how perfect life could be. But behind the high white fences and the polished windows of that house, something far less perfect was unfolding. Emily had always been perceptive, a woman who prided herself on her ability to sense when something was amiss. Over time, she had started to notice things that made her heart ache with uncertainty, small shifts in her husband's behavior that she couldn't explain. It wasn't one big thing. It was a series of little things, details that, when pieced together, painted a picture of a man she no longer recognized. Late nights became more frequent. Emails were deleted quickly, and phone calls were always taken in another room. Whenever Emily would ask about these changes, Mark would offer half-hearted explanations, things that never quite seemed to make sense. He had always been busy, yes, but there was an edge to his answers, a defensiveness she hadn't seen before. And then there were the moments when she would catch him staring off into the distance, as if his mind were somewhere far away, a place she wasn't allowed to go. At first, Emily dismissed the thoughts as nothing more than worries that come with long-term marriage. She trusted Mark, after all. He was her partner, her confidant, the man she had built a life with. But the nagging feeling in her gut refused to fade. There were too many inconsistencies, too many oddities that seemed to add up to something far larger than just simple stress or busyness. She found herself replaying conversations in her mind, trying to make sense of the strange interactions that had begun to pile up over the last few months. The more Emily paid attention, the more it felt like something was wrong. One night she came home early from a business trip, hoping to surprise Mark. But when she walked through the front door, she was met with an empty house, the usual comforting scent of dinner absent from the air. A glance at the clock told her it was still too early for him to be gone. She went to the kitchen, her thoughts already clouded with unease. She had begun to doubt herself, question whether she was just overthinking things. But then she saw it. Mark's phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter, unlocked. She could have walked away, told herself it wasn't her place to snoop, but the curiosity she had long suppressed pulled her in. What she found made her stomach drop. Messages, sent and received, that she had never been meant to see. Conversations that spoke of things she never thought possible, things she couldn't begin to understand. And then there was a call she could never forget. The pieces were finally falling into place. There was no denying it anymore. Mark was hiding something, or someone. And that someone wasn't just anyone. It was someone she knew. Someone who, at one point, had been a part of her family. Her stepdaughter, just 16 years old. The realization hit her like a wave, crashing over her with the force of everything she had ever trusted in her life. What Emily was about to face would be far more than just a marriage crumbling. This was betrayal on a level that no one could have predicted. A betrayal that would tear through her life like a storm, changing everything in its wake. What she was about to discover would not only shake her to her core, but would also send shockwaves through a community that thought it knew everything about the family that lived on this street. But nothing could have prepared anyone for what Emily would do next, and what she would do next would be something no one would ever forget. As Emily's world was beginning to unravel, one question remained. What happens next? The twists, the turns, the chilling decisions. This story is just getting started. If you're as captivated by this unfolding mystery as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the shocking details. And if you're already hooked, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what you think of Emily's choices. Also, tell us where you're watching from. Are you following this case from Texas or somewhere else? Let's see where our viewers are tuning in from. It's a night like any other in a peaceful neighborhood. The sky turns a muted orange, the distant hum of city life, muffled by the comforting silence of suburban streets. But inside one house, inside the walls of a home that once symbolized love and trust, the air is thick with something else. Emily, expecting another quiet evening, arrives home earlier than she had planned, stepping through the front door with a feeling she couldn't shake. A growing, gnawing discomfort that had been creeping at the back of her mind for weeks. Her steps are soft, almost hesitant, as she sets down her things. The house is still, too still. Something feels off. She pauses, listening, and then, through the silence, she hears it. A noise, faint but unmistakable. The sound of movement coming from the bedroom. The unmistakable sound of voices, low but urgent. Something about it is different from the usual evening sounds of her home. Her heart races as she stands frozen in place, her mind spinning, her instincts screaming that something is wrong. She doesn't know why, but every fiber of her being tells her to go to that room. And so she does. As Emily reaches for the door, she braces herself for something she could never prepare for. She opens it slowly, quietly, as if somehow she might escape the reality of what is about to unfold. But when she steps inside, the world as she knew it disappears. The man she loved, the man she built her life with, stands before her in a way she never imagined. He is with her daughter, their daughter, only this is not the familial bond she had once known. This moment, this sickening scene, shatters everything. Her blood runs cold, her body stiffens as if all the warmth has been drained from her in an instant. Her hands tremble, and her breath comes shallow and quick. The world goes quiet around her, as if her mind is struggling to process what she's seeing. The room begins to spin. It feels like hours, but in reality, it is only a matter of seconds before her husband, Mark, turns to her. His face, caught in the shock of her arrival, quickly shifts into something else. Guilt, fear, but also the desperate attempt to explain the unexplainable. "I can explain," he says, his voice trembling, "but there are no words that can fix what has already been broken. There is no explanation that can take away the image of her husband with her daughter. No apology that can make sense of the cruel reality that now surrounds them." And in the silence that follows, the teenage girl, once a symbol of innocence, stands frozen, her eyes wide with fear, lips trembling, but she does not speak. There is no defense. There is no explanation she can give. She is simply caught in the web that has ensnared all of them. In the stillness of the room, Emily's mind races, her heart pounding with rage, confusion, and an emotion that's far too complex to name. At that moment, she sees nothing but red. The gun in her hand feels heavier than it ever should. Her fingers curl around the cold metal, as if the weight of it is pulling her into another world. Mark, still trying to speak, still trying to make it right, takes a step toward her. But there is no coming back from this. In a split second, the anger and disbelief take over, pushing everything else aside. There is only the need to act, to make this moment stop before it can destroy her completely. The first shot cuts through the room like a clap of thunder. It's fast, brutal, and sudden. Mark stumbles back, his hands going to his chest, a look of shock and pain crossing his face. But Emily isn't done. She fires again, the second shot echoing through the house with devastating finality. The sound of it is deafening. Mark falls to the ground, lifeless, and in the silence that follows, the teenage daughter screams, her voice high-pitched, full of terror, as she tries to flee the room. But Emily's gaze doesn't waver. She doesn't hesitate. She raises the gun once more, firing a final shot into the fleeing figure. The girl collapses to the floor, her scream stifled by the deafening silence that fills the room. The echo of the gunshots still rings in the air, but in this house, in this moment, everything else has stopped. The once peaceful home now holds only the sound of Emily's breathing, ragged, broken, and the silence of two lives lost in a single, irreversible act. Within moments, the neighborhood is awake. Screams and the sound of gunshots flood the streets. 911 calls begin to pour in, frantic voices shouting, "Gunshots! Screaming! In our neighborhood!" Houston PD rushes to the scene, their sirens wailing through the once peaceful streets. But by the time they arrive, it's already too late. The house is silent, and a family that once had everything now lies shattered in the wake of a single, devastating moment. When the Houston Police Department arrived at the scene, the horror inside was clear. Officers rushed into the home, weapons drawn, as they made their way through the darkened hallways. The sound of their boots echoed as they approached the bedroom. There, in the dim light, lay the bodies of Mark and his daughter, both lifeless and sprawled across the floor in a grotesque tableau of violence. The scene was brutal, blood staining the carpet, the coldness of death already settling in. Yet the one thing that struck the officers most was the eerie calm of the woman who had committed the act. Emily sat motionless on the couch, her eyes fixed on something only she could see, her body unnervingly still. The officers approached cautiously, but there was no struggle, no attempt to flee. It was as if the life had drained out of her entirely. When they finally spoke to her, asking what had happened, her response was chilling in its simplicity. "I had to do it," she said, her voice almost too calm for someone who had just committed such an unimaginable act. The words hung in the air, an unsettling admission of guilt that gave no further explanation. It was a statement that seemed to dismiss any possible remorse, any attempt at justification. It was as if she had long made peace with what she had done, or perhaps had been pushed to this point long before that night. The investigation that followed would not be easy. The officers examined the crime scene meticulously, searching for clues that could explain what had led to this moment. Was it an act of cold-blooded premeditation? Or was it a crime of passion, an explosion of rage and betrayal that ended in violence? The evidence, for the most part, remained silent. There were no notes, no clear motivations, no warning signs. But the psychological profile of Emily was just beginning to unravel. As they dug deeper into her life, the investigators uncovered something that seemed to tell a different story. In her search history, they found unsettling evidence. How to catch a cheating spouse. The searches had been going on for months, a quiet and methodical attempt to uncover the truth she had feared. Her suspicions were growing, and the evidence of infidelity, however subtle, had been enough to send her down a dark path. She had spent hours online reading articles, watching videos, and researching methods of discovering whether her husband was hiding something from her. Neighbors revealed that Emily had been acting strange in the weeks leading up to the murders. She had been withdrawn, irritable, and often seen staring out the window or walking the neighborhood with a distant look in her eyes. One neighbor recalled seeing her in the driveway, sitting in her car for long periods of time, staring at her phone screen as if lost in thought. Others mentioned hearing raised voices between her and Mark, but nothing ever seemed to be out of the ordinary until that fateful night. The case quickly became the talk of Houston, with news outlets eager to report the shocking details of what had unfolded in the Quiet Heights neighborhood. Headlines read, "Murder in the Heights. Wife catches husband and stepdaughter. Ends in bloodshed." The public reaction was swift and polarized. Some sympathized with Emily, seeing her as a woman driven to the edge by years of betrayal. Others condemned her actions, calling it a senseless act of violence that could never be justified, no matter the circumstances. In the days that followed, the investigation continued to unfold. The police worked tirelessly, trying to piece together the events that led to this bloodshed. Was Emily a woman scorned, pushed to the brink by betrayal? Or was there something deeper at play, something that made her snap in a way that no one could have predicted? The answers would come in time, but for now the story of a family torn apart by secrets, lies, and violence was unfolding before the eyes of the public. The case that had captivated Houston's attention for weeks now reached its most crucial moment, the trial. The once peaceful family had been torn apart by a single, shocking act of violence. Emily, the wife who had murdered her husband and stepdaughter, was now seated in a courtroom, her fate resting in the hands of 12 jurors. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled by those eager to see justice served, whatever that might look like. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting its case. Their argument was straightforward. Emily was a cold-blooded killer who had executed her family without remorse. They painted a picture of a woman who had meticulously planned the murders, driven by jealousy and anger. The evidence was damning: her search history, her sudden violent outburst, and her chilling statement to the police. "I had to do it." This wasn't an act of self-defense, nor a spur-of-the-moment decision. Emily knew exactly what she was doing when she took that gun and shot her husband and stepdaughter. She wanted them both dead, and she made sure that happened. There was no accidental killing here. This was a calculated act of murder. But Emily's defense team had a different story to tell. They argued that Emily wasn't a cold-blooded murderer, but a woman pushed to the edge by months of emotional turmoil. They painted her as a victim of betrayal, someone who had been silently suffering as she watched her world unravel. The defense presented evidence of her increasing paranoia and the emotional toll of discovering her husband's affair with her own daughter. The defense claimed that in that moment, Emily snapped, her mind broken by the intense emotional pressure she had been under for months. Emily didn't want to kill anyone. She was a mother, a wife, a woman who had been betrayed in the worst way imaginable. What happened that night was not premeditated. It was an act of desperation, of emotional collapse. She was pushed to the point where she could no longer control her actions. Throughout the trial, Emily remained stoic, her face giving nothing away. Some said she was remorseful. Others argued that she was too detached and too calm for someone who had just taken 2 lives. But one thing was clear: her emotions were at war with herself. She seemed caught in a struggle between guilt and justification, her expression constantly shifting as the trial wore on. As the trial progressed, the case sparked heated debates across Houston. Talk shows, social media platforms, and local news were filled with passionate discussions. Some people sympathized with Emily, believing that the constant emotional strain, coupled with the betrayal, had driven her to an unthinkable breaking point. They argued that no one could endure such pain and humiliation without cracking. Do we really think she should be punished for acting out of rage and betrayal? Or was this a tragic outcome of a deeply fractured family? Many are asking, is this justice or is this a tragic act of desperation? But others were not so understanding. They saw Emily's actions as nothing more than cold-blooded murder. How could a mother, no matter the circumstances, take the life of her own daughter? How could anyone justify that kind of violence, no matter the pain they were experiencing? The debates raged on, but the courtroom was where the final decision would be made. After days of intense arguments, the jury finally reached a verdict. The tension in the room was thick as the foreman stood to read the decision. The courtroom fell silent, every person holding their breath, waiting for the moment that would define Emily's future. The verdict was read aloud. Emily, sitting in the courtroom, showed no sign of emotion. The words seemed to have no effect on her, as if she had already prepared herself for the inevitable. The jury had spoken, and Emily would now pay for her actions. The court finds the defendant guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was delivered without hesitation. Life in prison, no chance for parole. The severity of her crime had left no room for leniency. For Emily, there would be no second chance, no opportunity to make amends, only the stark reality of a lifetime behind bars. Months passed, and Emily settled into her new life behind bars. But in a rare interview, one that shocked both her supporters and critics alike, she finally spoke out. The world had been waiting to hear from the woman who had torn her family apart, and now, in the cold walls of her prison cell, Emily shared her thoughts for the first time. Emily, after everything that's happened, do you feel any regret for your actions? Her words sent shockwaves through the public. No remorse, no second thoughts. Emily had made peace with her actions, as if in her mind, what she had done was justified, no matter the cost. The world would never fully understand her motives, but in her own mind, it was clear. There was no other choice. And so the story of Emily, the woman who shattered a family, comes to a close, a tragedy of betrayal, violence, and loss. A case that will be remembered for years to come, with questions that may never be answered. What if she hadn't walked in on them that night? What if Emily had simply gone on with her day, never knowing what was happening behind the closed door? Would she have continued to live in the dark, oblivious to the betrayal unfolding in her own home? Would she have discovered the truth, or would it have remained buried forever? What if, instead of walking into that room, Emily had just walked away? What if she had let the anger pass, chosen to confront her husband and stepdaughter later, when her emotions weren't clouded by rage? Could she have approached the situation differently, avoiding the tragedy that followed? Could a simple change in timing have saved 2 lives? But instead she chose to act in the heat of the moment. The betrayal, the shock, the overwhelming rush of emotion. She didn't take the time to think things through. The decisions she made in that instant would alter the course of her life forever. And the question remains, could she have stopped herself? Or was she too far gone? Then there's the teenage daughter. Was she a victim in all of this? Or was she the mastermind, somehow manipulating the situation to her advantage? What role did she play in this tragedy? Was she an unwilling participant, coerced by her father, or did she have her own secrets? We know she was frozen in fear when Emily confronted them, but was there more going on than we've been told? Could she have been an innocent bystander, or was she actively involved in the betrayal her mother discovered? Could the teenage daughter have been manipulated by her father? Or was she simply caught up in a situation she never intended to be a part of? The dynamics between parents and children are complicated, and the relationship between a stepmother and stepdaughter can be fraught with tension. Was the daughter a victim of her father's actions, or was she complicit in the deceit? And what about the husband? Was he truly in a relationship with his stepdaughter, as Emily suspected? Could this have been more than just a moment of infidelity? Was there a deeper, darker connection that no one knew about? Or was it all a misunderstanding, an emotional affair twisted into something far worse in Emily's mind? Was there another twist we don't know about? Was this a case of mistaken identity, or was the relationship between father and daughter something far more sinister than we can even imagine? Could it have been an isolated mistake that spiraled out of control, or was this the culmination of a long-standing pattern of deception? Perhaps, in the end, there are more questions than answers. What if the truth is more complicated than any of us could ever imagine? Could Emily's actions have been the result of a momentary lapse in judgment? Or were the pieces of this puzzle scattered long before she ever stepped foot into that room? As we reflect on this case, we are left with these haunting questions. Could this tragedy have been avoided? Or was it inevitable from the moment Emily walked into that room? What do you think? Was this an act of pure rage, or did she seek justice for the unimaginable betrayal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was Emily justified, or did she cross a line from which there's no return? If you want more chilling true crime stories from Houston and beyond, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a shocking case. We bring you the most gripping stories every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Check out our next video on another shocking Houston case that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Stay tuned for the next twist.